Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to do a big breakdown of part 4 of Crime and Punishment, followed by a little analysis about Sonia and so far how Dostoevsky has essentially portrayed her in the novel. A reminder for homework, we do want to finish part 5 by Monday and read to part 6, chapter 3 for block number 1. So a main part of part 4 of the novel of Crime and Punishment is obviously Raskolnikov's whole sense of self-doubt, right? Commits this murder at the end of part 1. He's kind of getting away with it so far, and as part 2 and 3 have continued on, we've seen a little bit more of the character. Also, we've come to understand his original rationale for committing such a drastic and violent action. And in these parts, we've also seen him just feel guilt, paranoia, and obviously despair as well. And he's kind of wondering in part 4 of the novel, like, am I one of these extraordinary Hegelian people, right? Am I really one of these extraordinary individuals that I wrote about in that article? He has this quote, right? This is in part 4, we're in his mind a lot. One of these quotes, he's debating with himself who he really is. He says, "The real overlord to whom all things are permitted ransacks Toulon, commits a massacre in Paris, forgets an army in Egypt, throws away 500,000 men in his Moscow campaign." He's referencing Napoleon here, right? Who, according to both Raskolnikov and Hegel, is an extraordinary man, supposedly. Continuing on in the quote, "And after his death, they put up statues to him, and that means that everything is permitted to him. No, men like that don't have bodies, but lumps of bronze." So the whole idea here, right, is like, oh gosh, Raskolnikov's wondering, am I like Napoleon? Am I one of these bronze individuals, or am I not? Right? Maybe this is all the self-doubt that is again seeping through his own mind. The other main, topic that comes up in part 4, and this is Dostoevsky, he's doing this intentionally, is showing just the lack of consistency or coherence with Raskolnikov's own theory, right? His whole rationale for why he carried out this murder. Again, the main rationales for him were kind of both a utilitarian mindset and also this great man theory. And in part 4, we see that they don't really hold up. At one point, he's kind of thinking about the utilitarian aspect of the murder that he committed, and he's kind of comparing himself to back then this group of people, kind of labeling them as socialists. He's like, oh, the socialists are hardworking, business-like people. They occupy themselves with a common happiness. Again, for utilitarian kind of thought, right? Doing something for the common happiness. No, life has been given me once, and it won't come along again. I don't want to wait for universal happiness. I want to live my own life too. Otherwise, I'd better not to live at all. So if he's coming to this conclusion in part 4 of the novel, right, very much the opposite of part 1, when it was all about the common happiness, right? His whole rationale they overheard in that conversation in part 1 was, hey, if you kill Aliana Ivanova, it would make society better in some ways, right? It would you could use the money she has and all the jewelry and things that she has. You can help out others in society. But in part 4, as you see here, he's like, no, I don't want to do that anymore. I just want to live for myself. So, okay, then what the heck was the purpose of killing Aliana Ivanova, right? This just demonstrates that Raskolnikov doesn't have a coherent philosophy here, right? He's not consistent with his own train of thoughts, right? So based off of what's happening here, especially with Raskolnikov's state of mind, what's going on in his mind, I do want you to start thinking about, like, all right, what is Dostoevsky's message about these quote unquote modern ideas, whether it's utilitarianism or Hegel's ideas as well. But what is his maybe his commentary, right, about society, about Russian society, the fact that these ideas are kind of trickling into, I guess, the minds of St. Petersburg. Just something to keep in mind as we finish the novel. Now, another major part of part 4, maybe the most important part, is that we finally meet Svidrigailov. I know I broke down a little bit about the character earlier on. You probably talked about him in your discussions as well. And he is a creepy guy, right? Something I want to pose for you is to consider him as almost like a double, right? If we would say that Razumikin is maybe Raskolnikov's foil, more, kind of the opposite, Dostoevsky kind of portrays Svidrigailov as sort of a doubling of Raskolnikov. there's a lot of similarities, and maybe Raskolnikov realizes that. A lot of quotes in part four when they're talking to each other is about them kind of staring into each other's faces, right? Just being silent and staring. It's almost kind of like there's a mutual recognition, right? And there are some eerie similarities. They both recently committed a murder, right? Because it's heavily implied, that Svidrigailov murdered his wife as well as, probably murdered some other people in the past. Both are kind of pent up in their small rooms in St. Petersburg, but also both appear to be capable of random acts of generosity, giving money to people. So again, there's all these small little similarities. It's almost like it's a doubling of Raskolnikov. I think the big difference is, though, right, is that Raskolnikov does supposedly try to live by a philosophy or commit violent acts because of a philosophy. Svidrigailov doesn't. He doesn't really have a philosophy that gives him purpose, right? He's kind of just guided by passion or whims. Maybe the only exception you can make is that Dunya is sort of like the one thing guiding him. Maybe that's the one reason he came to St. Petersburg, right? Which is kind of creepy in and of itself. But it's just there's a key difference there, right? He's not writing. Svidrigailov is not writing essays and articles that are being published about Hegelian thought. And he's also a lot more confident than Raskolnikov, at least from what we see. We're nodding his head like the way we are in Raskolnikov's head. He doesn't seem very conflicted by any of the actions he does. He always talks about the nonsense of life. Things don't really matter. It's just like, it doesn't matter, right? He has very nonchalant views of murder and generosity. He just does it. Doesn't really think much about it, right? So we would maybe say that he has a nihilistic approach to life. Maybe he is an extreme version of what Raskolnikov could become if Raskolnikov continues down this path. A little side note about nihilism, right? It's basically the general term for the belief that all values are baseless, right? Everything is nonsense. Everything is pointless. There's no need to really find purpose or shape your own values in life. All is permissible since nothing really matters. I talked about at the start of the unit how Camus sometimes gets labeled a nihilist. He really rejected that, right? I sometimes call it free range to be a jerk. Right, if someone has a rather pessimistic take on life where nothing matters, we would maybe say like, oh, well, it's a very nihilistic train of thought. So the question, though, right, is for us, based off of part four of the novel, is Raskolnikov becoming a nihilistic person? He does seem to not really care anymore about his own rationale for doing anything. Well, if there is maybe a foreshadowing or a hint as to where Dostoevsky is going with that question, it is when he visits Sonia, and Sonia reads in a very dramatic manner the biblical story of the raising of Lazarus. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about Sonia later on, but this is definitely intentional on Dostoevsky's part. I think he does want to have this very much on-the-nose allusion, as Raskolnikov is kind of the Lazarus here, right? Lazarus being dead. Maybe Dostoevsky is having Raskolnikov being kind of philosophically dead, right? Heading down to the path of a nihilistic death of sorts, a philosophical death. And what happens in the biblical story that Sonia reads, Jesus raises Lazarus up from his tomb, right? Brings him back to life. So if this is a little bit of some foreshadowing, maybe we can assume that Dostoevsky does not want Raskolnikov to follow in the same footsteps of Svidrigailov, right? There's going to be some arc of either like resurrecting him or at least redeeming Raskolnikov in some way. Good question for us to keep in mind, though, is, all right, then who is that Jesus stand-in here in the story, right, of the raising of Lazarus? We'll have to come back to that in a little bit. Then the final major moment of part four is the round two of Porfiry versus Raskolnikov, right? They had an initial interrogation. We kind of get our second one here. And it almost seems like, yep, Raskolnikov is going to cave. He is going to give in. We already saw he's not feeling confident. He doesn't have much guidance in life in part four of the novel either. And Inspector Petrovich is in control this whole time. We find out later he even has like a star witness, right? That artisan who can help him at least prove the case that Raskolnikov was behind the murders. And it seems like, yeah, Inspector Porfiry Petrovich is going to get Raskolnikov to crack, right? Part of the conversation he kind of lays out his entire thesis, also Dostoevsky's thesis here, to Raskolnikov. He says, "If I leave one man quite alone, but let him know, or at least suspect every moment, that I know all about it, and if he is in continual suspicion and terror, he'll be bound to lose his head. It's not merely that he has nowhere to run. He is psychologically unable to escape me." And I think he says his trademark tee-hee-hee at some point there. And rather than standing up for himself, all that Raskolnikov can say is he looks down, he just says, "I won't allow it, I won't allow it, I won't allow it." So it seems like, okay, Raskolnikov is about to break. He's about to confess. Maybe that's the best thing for him. But then right at that moment, right, he lucks out. Right? Nikolai falsely confesses to the crime. We'll learn more about Nikolai's reasoning for that later on. And right when he does that, when he busts into the room and confesses to the crime, the roles are all of a sudden reversed. Then it's Inspector Petrovich who is no longer in control. He's shaken up. And it's Raskolnikov who's kind of confident. He's like, wait a minute. This is wild, right? He even walks out of that meeting, Porfiry Petrovich tries to catch up with him. He's baffled, he's flustered, but Raskolnikov is confident. He's like, all right, I guess I'm gonna get away with this. I'm gonna go on about my day. He says, well, maybe nothing does matter after all. At the end of that chapter, who does Raskolnikov kind of sound like? That's right. Does kind of sound a little bit like Svidrigailov. Not a great thing, right? Don't really want to become like him. But that's where things kind of are left off there, at least, at the end of part 4 of the novel. So hop on over to the next video to see a little breakdown of part 5 and also of Sonia.